Daniel walked through life, unnoticed and unremarkable. At least that is how it appeared to those who passed him on the streets every day. He lived in a small apartment at the edge of town, where the buildings looked tired and the lights often flickered. At night he went to work early, and returned late, blending in with the rhythm of the city without drawing attention. His co-workers called him quiet and polite, and they never pressed for more because Daniel never gave more. He offered small nods and faint smiles but never conversations, and so people assumed he liked it that way. Behind his eyes though lay a weight that time could not erase, a shadow that followed him everywhere. He carried memories he never spoke aloud and scars that never healed because no one had ever asked to see them. He had learned long ago that silence was easier than explaining. Silence could not be misunderstood and silence was safe. Daniel had grown used to being invisible in a world that rewarded those who shouted the loudest and pushed the hardest. He let others take the credit. He let others argue and fight and claim victories while he stood still and unnoticed. People thought he was content, but inside he was simply waiting. He did not even know what he was waiting for, only that something was missing, something essential. The town itself seemed to mirror him in many ways. It was a place that had seen better years, once thriving with businesses and busy streets, but now filled with empty storefronts and forgotten houses. The children played in cracked parking lots. The adults spoke in weary tones about bills and broken promises. Life here was hard and everyone carried it quietly. Daniel fit into this world because he too carried his burdens. Quietly every morning he took the same route to work, passing the bakery that opened too early for its own good, passing the old church, whose bell no longer rang, passing the small house with the chipped white fence where laughter used to drift into the streets. Long ago he walked with steady steps, his face calm and unreadable like a man carved out of stone. What no one knew was that the house with the chipped fence meant more to Daniel than anything else in the town. He never looked directly at it when he passed, but his heart always pulled in that direction. Memories rose up even when he tried to bury them. Evenings of warm meals, voices calling his name, a hand resting on his shoulder when he was too tired to speak. That house had been his refuge, once his salvation when he had been lost and broken. A family had lived there, a family that treated him like their own, though he was not. Their kindness had changed him, had stitched together pieces of his shattered youth. Now the house looked weathered and ordinary to anyone else, but to Daniel it was still sacred. He carried the memory of that family with him every day, even if no one knew. He had not spoken to them in years, not because he wanted distance, but because life had pushed him away with its constant grind, yet the bond remained silent and unbroken. He could not forget them, and he never would so. Daniel lived his quiet life, unnoticed by the world, holding on to memories that no one could see. A man walking through shadows, waiting without knowing for what or for when, only knowing that his story was not finished. The night the family disappeared, the town seemed unusually still, as though the air itself held its breath. The sky was clouded, the moon hidden, and the streets lay empty except for a few broken lights that flickered and hummed like whispers of something unseen. It was in this silence that a van rolled slowly down the narrow roads, its headlights dimmed, its engine purring low so that no one would notice. Men sat inside, their faces hidden behind masks, their voices muffled and cold. They had come with purpose, they had come with orders, and they did not care about the small town, they only cared about their Tesda. Family had gone to sleep, unaware of what was waiting for them. The father had locked the doors out of habit, the mother had kissed the children goodnight, and the children had drifted into dreams while the house grew quiet. A dog barked once outside, then fell silent again, as though warned by something it could not understand. Then the sound of boots scraped against the pavement and the whisper of metal tools cut through the night. The lock gave way with ease, and the door opened without a sound. The men moved quickly through the house. They knew exactly where to go. Their flashlights cut thin lines of light across the walls, but they kept their beams low, careful not to wake neighbors. They entered the bedrooms one by one. The father tried to fight, but was silenced in an instant. The mother clutched the children to her chest, but rough hands pulled them away, muffling their cries. The family was bound and dragged out into the night as though they were no more than Pargono. One in the town saw the van leave. It slipped away into the darkness, its taillights fading into nothingness, carrying with it the lives of people who had once filled their home with laughter. The street returned to silence. The night resumed its stillness, but something had been torn away, and the absence lingered. By morning, the town buzzed with unease. Neighbors knocked on the door, but no one answered. They peered through windows and found rooms left in disarray. They whispered among themselves, saying the family must have owed money, saying maybe They had enemies, saying perhaps they had runaway people, invented reasons, because they could not face the thought of strangers walking into their lives and taking them without warning. Fear spread quickly like a shadow draped across every street. Yet, among the whispers, Daniel listened closer. His co-workers at the factory mentioned it during lunch break, voices low and nervous. Someone said it was dangerous to talk about. Someone said powerful men had been seen in town the week before. Someone else claimed it was all nonsense, and that the family had left on their own. Daniel sat quietly eating his food, but inside his heart pounded harder with each word. He did not need rumors to tell him what had happened. He knew in his bones that something terrible had taken place. He felt it with a clarity that silenced everything around him. The family was gone, and he knew without question that they had not left by choice. He pushed his tray away, his hands trembling, though his face remained calm. He excused himself without explanation, walking away from the chatter and the stares. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the silence around him break, not on the outside but within him. Something was stirring, something fierce and unstoppable. The town continued to speak in hushed tones about the missing family. Some said it was debt collectors, others insisted it was the work of men involved in dangerous business. A few even suggested the family had run away to escape something that no one else could understand. The theories multiplied like smoke, clouding the truth, but Daniel knew better. The moment he heard the news, he felt a weight in his chest, a pressure that told him this was no ordinary disappearance. He remembered the chipped white fence he passed every morning, and the laughter that once spilled out from behind it. He remembered how the family had welcomed him years ago, when he had been nothing more than a lost soul wandering through life. He had been younger, then broken by circumstances that had left him with no place to call home. He had wandered into town with nothing but the clothes on his back and an emptiness that threatened to swallow him whole. Yet they had opened their door to him, as though he belonged there. The father had offered him work around the yard, the mother had set an extra plate at the table without asking questions. The children had followed him with wide eyes as though he were someone important, even though he was not. For months he had slept under their roof, and for the first time in his life he had known what it meant to feel safe. He never forgot the warmth of those evenings or the comfort of voices that cared about him without expecting anything in return. Those same voices had been silenced in the night, and Daniel felt as though part of himself had been stolen too. The townspeople could guess at debts and secrets, but Daniel knew the truth. Deep down, the family had no enemies, not the kind who would come with masks and vans and drag them away. They were simple, kind people, and that made it even more chilling, because whoever had taken them had done so with precision, with planning, with a coldness that suggested this was bigger than the town itself. Daniel walked the streets in silence, his mind heavy with memory and dread. He replayed the words he had heard, the frightened whispers of co-workers, the quiet denial of neighbors. He thought about how no one would stand up for the family. No one would risk angering whoever was behind the van. People would rather bury the truth under excuses than face the terror that lingered in the shadows. But Daniel was not like them. He owed the family more than he could ever repay. He owed them his life, and now that life demanded something of him. He felt it deep inside, a fire he had long kept hidden under the mask of a quiet man. He could not remain invisible any longer, not when they were gone. The thought returned again and again like a drumbeat. In his skull they were his family, maybe not by blood, not by name, not in the way the world measured such things. But to him they were his family, and the men who had taken them had taken something far greater than they understood. Daniel stopped at the old house that evening, staring at the chipped fence and the silent windows. His reflection shimmered faintly in the glass, and for the first time in years he saw not a quiet, unnoticed man but something else. He saw someone standing on the edge of a choice, and he knew that once he stepped forward there would be no turning back. Daniel stood at the edge of the chipped white fence, long after the sun had set, the sky above painted in dull streaks of gray and orange fading into black. He could hear the distant hum of traffic and the occasional bark of a dog, but here in front of the house everything was quiet. Too quiet. He stared at the windows, half expecting to see the faint glow of a lamp or hear the laughter that used to spill through the cracks of the wooden walls. Instead there was only silence and an emptiness that pressed against his chest. Memories of the past washed over him in heavy waves. He remembered the father, a man of strength and patience, who had taught him how to work with his hands, how to build and fix things when Daniel had felt too broken to fix himself. He remembered the mother whose kindness had softened the sharp edges of his pain. She had given him food when he was starving. She had spoken gently, when his world had been filled only with harshness, and he remembered the children, two bright souls who had followed him around with questions and smiles, making him laugh when he thought laughter was gone forever. Daniel clenched his fists as those memories sharpened into something painful. The family had given him a sense of belonging when he had none. They had offered him warmth without ever asking who he was or where he came from. They had taken him in without judgment, and in doing so had saved him from the emptiness that might have consumed him. He had promised himself, silently, that he would never forget them, and he had kept that promise even when distance and time had carried him away from their home now. Standing in front of their house, Daniel felt something inside him ignite. The quiet man who lived unnoticed was being replaced by something else, something fierce. The anger rose slowly, steady and unstoppable, filling the void that silence had left for so many years. He thought of the masked men who had dared to invade this house of kindness, dragging away the very people who had once saved his life. They had not known whose family they had taken. They had not known that their crime had reached into the heart of a man who would not let it go. The neighbors watched Daniel from behind curtains, whispering about the quiet man who lingered at the house. They wondered why he seemed so invested, but they did not know his history, and they did not see the fire growing in his eyes. Daniel ignored them all. He no longer cared about fitting in, about staying hidden or keeping his silence. He cared only about the family, and about bringing them back. That night, Daniel made a choice. He would find them no matter where they had been taken, no matter who had taken them, and no matter what it cost him. He would search through every shadow. He would chase every lead. He would not rest until he saw them safe again. He did not know how long the path would be or how dangerous, but none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was that the family, who had once saved him, was now in the hands of strangers, and Daniel was ready to do whatever it took to bring them home. Daniel rose before dawn, his mind restless from a night without sleep. The streets were empty, the air cool and heavy with mist. He walked with purpose, his eyes sharper than they had been in years. The decision had already been made. He was not going to wait for answers to fall from the sky. He was going to find them himself. His first steps led him back to the house again. He walked the perimeter, scanning the ground for anything left behind. The police had already come and gone. Though their visit had been short, they had written reports, asked questions, and then moved on, as though the disappearance was nothing more than another statistic. Daniel crouched near the fence and noticed faint marks in the dirt, tire tracks, heavy and deep, leading away from the street. They had been missed or ignored, but Daniel studied them carefully. He traced the grooves with his fingers, committing them to memory. The van, he thought, a dark van. From there he began asking questions, though he knew most would not want to answer. He went to the bakery, where the owner always rose early. She claimed she had seen nothing that night, her eyes shifting nervously as she wiped the counter. He moved to the gas station, where the attendant said a black van had filled up a few days before, with men inside who did not speak much. Their silence had been unnerving enough that the attendant remembered. Daniel noted it and moved on piece by piece, building a map in his mind. The town, however, was not friendly to questions. Neighbors shut their doors when he approached, and some warned him quietly to let it go. They said it was not his business, that powerful men had done this, and that no good would come from stirring up trouble. Daniel listened, but he did not waver. Fear had kept this town quiet for too long. Fear would not silence him. As the day stretched on, he walked the back roads, searching for signs. His boots carried him through dust and gravel until he reached the outskirts of town, where old warehouses stood, abandoned windows, broken walls, rusted with time. It was here that he paused, because something felt wrong. He saw fresh footprints near the doors, too many for a place supposedly forgotten. He studied the tracks and realized they led inside. The warehouse loomed before him, dark and silent. He did not enter, not yet. Instead, he stepped back into the shadows, marking the place in his mind. He needed to know more. He needed to be certain, but already his pulse quickened as he understood he was close. The trail was not cold. The trail was alive, and it was pulling him forward. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Daniel sat alone and thought of the family. He pictured their faces, the kindness they had shown him, the nights they had given him shelter. He knew the men who had taken them believed no one would come after them. They believed no one would care, but Daniel cared, and soon they would learn what it meant to take from a man who owed everything to the people they had stolen. The next morning, Daniel returned to the outskirts, where the warehouses stood against the gray sky like skeletons of a forgotten age. The air smelled of rust and damp earth, and the silence there was heavier than silence elsewhere. It was the kind of silence that carried secrets, and Daniel moved, carefully keeping to the edges where weeds and broken fences offered cover. He watched the warehouse from a distance. At first it appeared lifeless, just another hollow shell left behind by time, but soon movement stirred. A truck pulled up, its tires grinding against the gravel. Two men stepped out, dressed in dark clothing, their heads turning sharply, as if always aware of being watched. They carried crates inside without speaking, Daniel noted. Their movements, the way they glanced around, the way they kept their hands close to their sides like men used to carrying weapons. Hours passed as he observed. From his position in the weeds, Daniel counted at least 6 men coming and going, sometimes alone, sometimes in pairs. They did not linger outside. They moved quickly as though afraid of being noticed by anyone who might pass, though in truth the town rarely sent anyone this far. Daniel realized that the location had been chosen for this reason. It was hidden in plain sight, a place too ordinary for suspicion. Daniel felt the fire inside him burn brighter as he pieced it together. The family had been taken here. He could feel it in his bones. The men thought no one would come looking, thought no one would care enough to follow the faint traces left behind. But Daniel was not like the rest of the town. He carried something inside him that would not allow him to walk. As the sun began to lower, Daniel made his way around the back of the building, his boots pressed into the soft ground, leaving no sound. He found a window broken long ago, with glass scattered like dull teeth on the dirt. Through it he caught glimpses of the interior. The light was dim, but he could make out shapes, crates stacked high, metal tables, a flicker of movement that confirmed what he already knew. This place was not abandoned. This place was alive with purpose. He leaned closer, straining to hear voices. They were low, muffled by walls, but he caught fragments, orders being given, men laughing quietly, the kind of laughter that chilled rather than warmed. Daniel felt his jaw tighten. His hands curled into fists as he thought of the family inside, perhaps bound, perhaps afraid. The image of their faces fueled him. It sharpened his focus, steadied his breathing. He knew he could not rush in now, not without knowing the full scope, but he also knew he could not wait forever. As night fell, he retreated to the edge of the woods nearby, setting himself in a place where he could watch without being seen. The warehouse glowed faintly under weak security lights, and shadows moved across the yard. Daniel waited, his body still, his eyes fixed. He was no longer the quiet man of yesterday. He was a hunter now, and the men inside the warehouse were prey who did not yet realize that something relentless had begun to stalk them. The night grew colder as Daniel remained hidden in the shadows near the warehouse. The men inside believed they were safe, but Daniel could see their carelessness building with each passing hour. They laughed louder, they smoked near the doors, they moved without caution, as though convinced no one would ever dare to challenge them. This arrogance gave Daniel an opening, and he intended to use it. Crept along the edge of the yard, his steps slow, his breaths even. He had no weapons, no tools, except for his own resolve and the anger that had been simmering inside him since the family was taken. The broken window on the side wall became his target. He crouched low, slipped through the frame, and dropped silently onto the concrete floor inside. The air smelled of oil and dust, and the faint hum of machinery echoed in the distance. Daniel kept to the shadows, moving between stacks of crates. Each sound he heard sharpened his senses. Voices drifted closer, to men talking, their words casual. Their laughter cut through the darkness, and then one of them mentioned the family not by name but by number, a number they had been given, as though human lives could be reduced to a list. Daniel felt his blood run hot, but he did not move. He waited, listening, memorizing details. The men spoke of transport, of deadlines, of someone higher giving the orders. It was more organized than Daniel had feared. This was no random crime. It was part of something larger. When the two men passed, Daniel followed. At a distance, his body moved with the silence of a predator, until one of the men turned suddenly, sensing something. The beam of a flashlight swept across the room and landed near Daniel, though not on him. He froze, holding his breath. The man stepped closer, muttering under his breath, and Daniel knew the choice had come. He could not remain hidden forever. In a swift motion, Daniel lunged from the shadows. His hand struck the flashlight, sending it clattering across the floor before the man could shout. Daniel drove him into the crates, silencing him with a single crushing blow. The second man spun, reaching for his weapon, but Daniel was faster. He tackled him to the ground, wresting the gun from his grip. The struggle was brief and violent, ending with the man lying still and Daniel standing above him, breathing hard. The noise had been enough to draw attention, though. Footsteps pounded through the corridors, voices shouted in alarm. Daniel grabbed the weapon and vanished into the maze of crates, using the confusion to slip deeper into the building. He could hear men calling out, searching for him, unaware of who he was, or why he had come. They only knew that someone had invaded their space. Daniel crouched low, his mind racing. The fight had revealed two things. The first was that the family was indeed inside this place. The second was that the men who held them were not untouchable. They bled, they fell, they panicked like anyone else, and Daniel realized with grim certainty that he could use this fear against them. Daniel moved through the warehouse like a shadow, his body pressed against the crates as voices echoed through the corridors. The men were searching for him, but they did not know who they were dealing with. They shouted orders, they split into groups, and their boots pounded against the concrete floor. Yet in their noise, Daniel found opportunity because chaos always left openings. He slipped into a side room dimly lit by a single hanging bulb. The space smelled of rust and old gasoline. In the corner he saw papers scattered across a table, maps, documents, numbers written in hurried strokes. He scanned them quickly, his eyes locking on details: a route leading out of town, a date, marked in red, boxes of supplies listed with precision. This was no small operation. This was organized and deliberate. The family was not taken for ransom or revenge. They were pieces of a larger plan. A sound behind him broke his focus. A man stepped through the doorway, weapon raised. Daniel reacted before thought could catch him. He drove the barrel aside with one hand and slammed the man against the wall with the other. The fight was quick and silent, ending with the man unconscious at his feet. Daniel took the radio from his belt, tucking it into his pocket. Now he could hear their chatter, their growing confusion, as they realized someone was inside dismantling their certainty. The warehouse became a hunting ground. Daniel moved room by room, striking with precision. One man caught unaware near the loading dock dropped with a single blow. Another, searching near the stairs, was pulled into the shadows before he could raise an alarm. Each encounter sharpened Daniel's focus until fear shifted from his own chest into theirs. Their voices on the radio grew frantic. They spoke of a ghost, a figure moving unseen and unstoppable. But Daniel was not simply hunting, he was searching. His ears strained for any sound that was not the men, any faint cry, any muffled plea. And then at last he heard it, a thin voice carried through the vents, soft, desperate, a child's whisper. He froze, listening again, and it came once more, faint but real. His heart hammered. He knew without doubt it was them. He followed the sound, moving carefully along the wall, until he found a reinforced door at the far end of the corridor. A guard stood there, leaning against the frame, weapon across his lap. His eyes were tired, his body lazy, as though he believed nothing could breach that door. Daniel approached with steady steps, silent, until he was close enough. Then in one swift motion, he struck the man, crumpled without a sound, and Daniel caught him, lowering him to the floor. Daniel pressed his ear to the cold metal of the door, and heard it again, a voice small and afraid but alive. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the fire inside him steady. This was no longer about waiting or planning. This was the moment he had been moving toward from the second he heard they were gone. The men inside had taken the wrong family, and now Daniel stood at their door, ready to show them the cost. Daniel stood before the reinforced door, his hand pressed against the cold metal. The faint sound of the children behind it was enough to strip away every doubt, every hesitation. His heart was steady, his breathing even, and his mind sharp. He was no longer the quiet man who lived unnoticed. He was something else, now forged by memory and bound by loyalty. He checked the weapon he had taken from one of the guards and positioned himself low. His other hand gripped the handle, and with one hard pull he forced it open. The hinges screamed and the door crashed inward, light flooding the room. Inside he saw them huddled together, the father bound to a chair, bruised but alive, the mother holding the children close, her eyes wide with fear. Relief surged through Daniel at the sight of them, but there was no time to pause. Shouts erupted from behind him. The men had realized where he was. Their boots thundered against the floor as they charged down the corridor. Daniel stepped inside, shielding the family with his body. He raised the weapon and fired short, precise bursts, forcing the first group to scatter. They returned, fire bullets tearing into the walls, sparks flying from metal crates. Daniel moved quickly, dragging a table across to form cover. The family stared at him, not recognizing him at first in the chaos. But then the father looked closer, his eyes widening with sudden memory. He whispered the name Daniel, barely audible over the noise. Daniel glanced back for only a second, and gave a firm nod. Yes, it was him, the boy they had once saved, now returned as a man standing between them and death. More men stormed the corridor, thinking their numbers gave them strength, but Daniel had become relentless. His movements were sharp, Calculated, he struck them down one after another, using shadows and angles to his advantage. Every man who fell fueled the fear of the others. They shouted to one another, panic lacing their voices. The ghost had become real, and he was tearing through them with fury. When the gun clicked empty, Daniel did not stop. He launched forward, using fists and elbows, his strength driven by rage. He slammed one man into the wall, sending him crumpling to the floor. He turned on another, striking, until the weapon slipped from his grasp, and the man lay still. The air grew thick with smoke and dust, the sound of battle filling the warehouse. At last silence fell. The corridor lay littered with the fallen, and Daniel stood breathing hard, his knuckles bruised, his clothes torn. He lowered the weapon, and turned back to the family. The mother clutched the children, tears streaking her face. The father, though battered, held his head high, his eyes locked on Daniel with gratitude and disbelief. Daniel cut their bindings, quickly pulling them to their feet. He spoke few words, only enough to reassure them. "You are safe now." They clung to him, the children gripping his arm as though afraid he might vanish. He led them out of the warehouse, into the night air, cool and clean compared to the chaos inside. The men who had taken the family never understood their mistake. They thought they had stolen a nameless family from a forgotten town, but what they had done was awaken the wrath of a man who owed everything to those lives. They had taken his family, and now they were gone. Daniel walked away with the family at his side, the silence around him no longer empty but filled with purpose.